I'm Margaret Walsh, 67, a retired airline safety auditor who still measures life in procedures and proof. This is my house in Maple Heights, the one my husband and I paid off brick by brick. I make my coffee, check my garden from the back window, and keep records like a habit I never turned off. I don't shout. I verify. Brooke Carter is standing in my kitchen with her phone in her hand like it's a badge. She smiles the way people do when they're sure you won't push back. If I don't like living with them, I'm free to leave. She says it while leaning against my refrigerator. The one I bought. In the home with my name on the deed. Jason Walsh. My son. Looks at the floor and lets the sentence hang there. Silence is the easiest kind of betrayal. I walk upstairs and pull a suitcase from the closet. It opens clean. The zipper smooth as a runway check. I don't fold my sweaters. I pack Brooke's. The leggings that never saw a gym. The handbags that arrived in too many boxes. Jason's console goes in next. Cords wrapped like evidence tags. The room smells like expensive perfume and entitlement. Brooke follows, her tone turning soft and rehearsed. She lifts her phone. Thumb hovering. Voice already breaking on cue. She calls 911 and tells them I'm confused. That I'm throwing things. That she's scared. She uses my last name like a prop. She paints a picture of a woman losing her mind in the middle of a lovely afternoon. I keep packing. My hands are steady. My breathing is even. If strangers are about to walk into my home and decide who I am, they can meet the version who knows exactly what she's doing. What would you do? In your own kitchen. When someone tells you to leave, the doorbell rang less than 10 minutes after Brooke's call. Through the front window, I saw 2 police officers and a paramedic waiting on the porch. Their stance careful. Their faces set. I opened the door and welcomed them into my home. The older officer asked if I was Mrs. Walsh. I told him I had lived here for 32 years. Brooke appeared at the top of the stairs with tears running down her cheeks, her voice trembling as if she had rehearsed it. She thanked the officers for coming, claiming I had suddenly thrown their belongings, shouting that they didn't belong here. Jason stood behind her, pale and silent, letting her performance hang in the air. The paramedic stepped forward, clipboard ready, asking me for the date, the time, and who the president was. I answered calmly, steady as if I were back in an airline audit. I recited every detail without hesitation. The paramedic nodded, noting that I seemed lucid. That was when Dr. Alan Pierce entered from behind them. Tall, gray-haired, and dressed like a professional called in for emergencies. He introduced himself as my psychiatrist, speaking with practiced authority. He claimed I had been showing memory lapses and paranoia. I looked at him squarely. I had never seen this man before in my life. I asked for a moment to make a phone call, and the officers allowed it. I dialed Olivia Hart, the attorney who had handled my husband's estate. She answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and steady. And within 20 minutes, she was at my front door. She walked past Brooke's staged tears and Jason's downcast silence, straight to Dr. Alan Pierce. Olivia introduced herself to the officers, then turned her attention on him. Calm but firm. She asked for his credentials. He hesitated. She produced a folder from her briefcase and placed it on the coffee table. According to the state medical board, Dr. Pierce had lost his license months earlier for involvement in fraudulent psychiatric holds. The older officer raised his eyebrows. The younger one shifted uncomfortably. And Brooke's performance faltered. Dr. Pierce stammered about misunderstandings, but Olivia cut him off with the precision of a scalpel. She reminded the officers that impersonating a licensed physician was a crime, and that every word he had spoken in this house could be used against him. The silence that followed was heavy. Brooke's face drained of color. Jason sank further into the background. Olivia closed the folder with deliberate calm. This, she said, was only the beginning. What we had just seen was not a misunderstanding but the opening move of a larger scheme. By the next morning, Olivia Hart had arranged for a small set of security cameras and audio recorders to be installed around the house. They were discreet, barely noticeable, but sharp enough to capture every word. I moved about my day as usual, cooking breakfast and folding laundry. While the lenses watched silently from the corners, Brooke Carter barely looked up from her phone. Convinced her act had worked the night before, Jason Walsh kept to the couch, restless but unwilling to challenge her. That evening I chose my moment. I asked Brooke how she planned to pay for the designer handbags stacked in the guest room. She rolled her eyes and said she used her own income. I pressed further, reminding her that not one receipt showed her contribution to groceries or utilities in 8 months. Her voice sharpened, her face flushed, and the camera above the mantel caught every word. I laid down a credit card statement on the counter, showing the charges from the Cancun trip. She snapped back that I had authorized it, then faltered when I reminded her I had been in my doctor's office at the exact time the booking was made. The recorder caught the stumble, the nervous laugh that followed, and then the careless admission. She admitted she had slipped something into my morning coffee to help me relax while she handled paperwork. Jason froze, the color draining from his face as he realized what that meant. Brooke tried to backpedal, but the audio was clear, indeniable, and already saved. The mask she had worn for months was cracking in real time. And this time, she couldn't control the stage. I was in the grocery store a few days later when a woman stopped me in the cereal aisle. She introduced herself as Nora Kaplan, saying she remembered my name from years back. Though I couldn't place her, she spoke warmly, her tone sympathetic. And after a few pleasantries, she lowered her voice as if we were sharing a secret. She said she had overheard me talking to the pharmacist about how stressful managing retirement funds could be. I hadn't said a word about finances, but I let her continue. Nora explained that she had recently lost her husband and nearly faced disaster when relatives tried to interfere with her estate. What saved her, she claimed, was a financial advisor named Thomas Avery. According to her, he specialized in protecting widows from predatory family members. She handed me his card with a smile that felt carefully rehearsed. The timing, the language, even the false intimacy of it all set every warning light off in my head. That evening, Thomas Avery called. His voice was smooth, practiced, reassuring. He said Nora had spoken highly of me and that he wanted to offer help. He described something called an asset shield, a process that involved transferring funds temporarily into a secure account while setting up protections. He said it was fast, legal, and safe. I agreed politely to meet, then hung up and called Special Agent Carla Brooks. The bait had been dropped, and I knew exactly who was supposed to bite. Thomas Avery's office was designed to inspire trust. Leather chairs, framed diplomas, family photographs on the desk, every detail carefully staged to put a widow at ease. He greeted me warmly, offering coffee and a sympathetic nod, then began to lay out his so-called asset shield. His words flowed like a script he had rehearsed countless times. He explained that by signing a temporary power of attorney, my assets could be transferred into a protective holding account for 2 weeks. During that time, he said, my money would be untouchable by family members who might try to interfere. His tone was patient, almost fatherly, but every phrase carried the weight of control. He leaned forward, assuring me that many clients had gone through the same process, including Nora Kaplan. I let him talk, nodding politely, then began asking questions. Where exactly would the funds be kept? Who determined when the temporary control ended? He smiled and said he did, based on his professional judgment. I pressed further. What if something happened to me during those 2 weeks? He said the shield would remain in place indefinitely until I was able to manage my affairs again. I wrote down his answers, acting as though I was only cautious. Inside, I felt the precision of an audit returning to me. He believed he was winning me over. But every word was being recorded. I told him I would think it over and call tomorrow. He smiled as I left, confident in his pitch. He didn't realize the real meeting had only just begun. Thomas Avery arrived at my house on a gray afternoon, carrying a polished leather briefcase and wearing the same confident smile he had used in his office. I led him into the living room, where he spread his documents across my coffee table with the smooth efficiency of a man who believed he was in control. He placed the power of attorney form in front of me and began explaining the clauses, his voice low and persuasive. I picked up the papers and read each line slowly. The language was broad, far broader than what he had implied before. It granted him authority not only over my finances but over medical decisions as well. I asked him when the authority would end. He replied without hesitation that it would expire once he determined my assets were fully protected. The phrasing was deliberate, his judgment, not mine. I set the pen down and folded my hands. I reminded him that in my career as an airline safety auditor, vague language was never acceptable. I repeated his words back to him, watching his face flicker. He tried to reassure me, saying it was only temporary, that I could trust him. I stood and walked to the window, pointing toward the quiet van parked across the street. His head turned, and I saw the first hint of fear replace his smile. Special Agent Carla Brooks stepped inside with 2 other agents, their badges raised. As Avery scrambled to gather his papers, she placed him under arrest. His parting words were bitter, promising this was only the middle tier of something larger. 2 days after Thomas Avery was taken away in handcuffs, Special Agent Carla Brooks sat at my kitchen table with a thick folder spread open. She explained that Avery was not the head of the operation, only a coordinator. The person above him was real, licensed, and far more dangerous. The name on the file was Dr. MOE. Lila Merrick. Dr. Merrick ran a respected geriatric practice in Chicago and also owned a consulting firm called Merrick Senior Solutions. On paper, she advised families on elder care. In reality, she identified wealthy, isolated seniors and funneled their information to people like Avery. Her medical credibility made her untouchable. Patients trusted her because she wore a white coat and carried the weight of a legitimate degree. The FBI had traced her connections across 15 states. More than 200 elderly victims had been pushed into fraudulent facilities or stripped of their savings through manufactured incompetency claims. The estimated theft exceeded $50 million. The scope was staggering, and the cruelty was systematic. Then, Agent Brooks handed me another folder with my own name across the front. Inside were copies of my medical records, my financial statements, and even photographs of my home. I was marked as a perfect target 18 months before Brooke Carter ever set foot in my kitchen. The realization landed like a stone. Brooke hadn't stumbled into my son's life by chance. She had been placed there, part of Dr. Merrick's network from the beginning. Dr. Lila Merrick greeted me in her clinic with the polished calm of a woman who had spent decades building credibility. Her office smelled faintly of lavender, walls lined with certificates and framed photos of smiling patients. She spoke gently about aging with dignity, about families overwhelmed by responsibility, and about the value of preventive care. Everything about her posture said compassion. Everything about her words said, "Trust me." She suggested we perform a routine cognitive assessment. She said it would protect me from misunderstandings. The same language I had heard from Thomas Avery. Then she shifted, recommending a medication review, explaining that sometimes older patients needed mild stabilizers to ensure sound judgment. Her tone was measured, but I recognized the script. I leaned forward and asked for her to walk me through the process. Not in broad terms, but step by step. As if I were her auditor, I asked where each authorization went, which codes were used, how funds were routed during temporary oversight. I asked her to explain why the same case number appeared twice on different facility reports. She smiled, but her pen began tapping. I pointed to a line item that showed funds transferring to a consulting firm in Delaware, one she happened to own. Her voice tightened. The mask slipped. The more I pressed with precise questions, the more her warmth drained away. When I recited her own words back to her, highlighting the contradictions, her silence confirmed what the paperwork already proved. At that moment, Special Agent Carla Brooks entered with a warrant. The white coat could no longer shield Dr. Lila Merrick from the evidence she had built against herself. In the weeks that followed, every name tied to the scheme was dragged into the light. Brooke Carter faced charges for elder fraud and tampering. Her tears replaced by silence in a county jail cell. Jason Walsh was not charged, but he was forced to repay what had been siphoned into their joint account. He moved out with nothing but his clothes, leaving me with a note that read like regret. Though regret cannot erase complicity. Dr. Alan Pierce, the man who called himself my psychiatrist, was indicted for impersonation and conspiracy. His past cases are now being reopened. Dozens of families preparing to testify. Thomas Avery agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors, but even his cooperation could not spare him from prison. The signatures on his contracts were evidence enough. Dr. Lila Merrick was the crown jewel of the indictment. She lost her license. Her firm was dismantled, and she now faces multiple federal counts for fraud, racketeering, and exploitation. Nora Kaplan, the woman who approached me in the grocery store, was revealed as a recruiter paid for every new target she delivered. Even she could not slip away. For my part, restitution was ordered. The money that had been siphoned was returned with interest, though the real victory was something more lasting. I worked with Agent Carla Brooks to establish a community watchdog program so no neighbor of mine would ever sit alone against predators like these. I did not need revenge, shouted from rooftops. Justice was quieter, cleaner. I had raised my evidence, and in the end, it was enough to bring them all down. Thank you for staying with me to the end. If this story hit a nerve, share it and tell me where you're watching from. Your voice protects someone else tonight. Subscribe for more true-to-life justice stories, and if you've been there, I'm listening.